categories of awards: the Youth Award, the Trailblazer Awards, and the Lifetime Achievement Award.
From grassroots to leaders at all sectors, and from across the country, the Canadian Science Policy Centre is pleased to recognize the excellence and celebrate every year champions who have taken bold actions and have impacted in all areas of science and innovation policy.
Cette année, le CPSC présente le prix jeunesse, 3 prix du pionnier en politique scientifique et en politique d'innovation, et le prix pour l'ensemble des réalisations de la politique scientifique.
The CSPC Youth Award recognizes an individual under the age of 35 who proposes an innovative and evidence-based policy to make a positive difference to all Canadians. The applicants can be from any background, any discipline, and with any professional expertise.
Joignez-vous à nous pour passer en revue nos précédents lauréats du prix jeunesse.
Through that, we can prevent up to 22,000 deaths in Canada a year. That is how many Canadians die every year from adverse drug reactions.
And I think if I want you to take anything away from this talk, I think is that I really wrote this policy proposal because I believe that cooking and heating should be something that sustains us.
My proposal is a sign of the collective endurance of Indigenous peoples and our refusal to be altogether defined by victimization.
Policy changes when we facilitate dialogue and refuse to accept the status quo. So ask questions and demand better. Thank you.
Canada is the 6th largest seafood exporter in the world, sending over 2/3 of domestically caught seafood into foreign markets.
I'm so thrilled to be the recipient of the Canadian Science Policy Centre's Youth Policy Award this year.
Nous commençons donc avec le prix jeunesse. Les propositions sont liées à un ou plusieurs thèmes de la conférence et sont évaluées de façon anonymisée par notre comité d'experts en fonction de leur emploi efficace de preuves, de leur impact attendu, de leur créativité et de la façon dont elles communiquent leurs solutions.
Selection of these awards would not have been possible without the commitment and dedication of our incredible award committee members. Naveed Aziz, CEO of CGEN, Paul Defer, de Policy Works de l'Université d'Ottawa, John Hepburn, CEO of MyTax, Sandra Noel, Director at ISED, and Shakira Sarasija, Postdoctoral Fellow, University of Ottawa, and CSPC 2021 Youth Award winner. This award also would not simply have been possible without the work of many volunteers that we would like to particularly thank. Oksana Pimenova, Mariam Taheri, Linda David, and Wendy Joe. Yes.
We would now like to invite the Honourable Greg Fergus and CSPC President Mehrdad Hariri back up to the stage to hand out the awards.
Our runner-up this year is Carl Tutton, PhD student at the University of Waterloo, for his proposal titled Projected Product Lifespan, a labeling system encouraging long-lived portable electronics.
Our 2022 Youth Award winner is Alex Young-Soo Lee, medical student at the University of Ottawa, for his proposal titled Addressing the Homelessness Crisis Through HOUSE Approach. Unfortunately, Alex was not able to join us this evening, So Eugenia will read his acceptance speech.
I'd like to say congratulations to Alex, and I hope I can do his speech justice. Just pretend. My name is Alex, and I'm a third-year medical student at the University of Ottawa. I wish I could be joining everyone at the conference, but due to unforeseen medical reasons, I'll be delivering this speech by proxy. I would first like to start by thanking the award committee for this award and the organizing team for hosting a conference where scholars, learners, and educators come together to discuss and share ideas to catalyze research, which in turn fuels policy innovation. In a similar capacity, this is how our Homeless Health Initiative team came together to find a solution to improve health outcomes through innovative policy change. It shouldn't be a surprise to everyone that given the state of our healthcare system, there are critical gaps in caring for the homeless. But what my policy aims to do is take both a policy and education-oriented approach to improve healthcare. One of the biggest challenges for accessing temporary housing is regulations. Homeless populations have a higher risk of substance abuse disorder, as substances are used as a coping mechanism for harsh living conditions, stress, and trauma. Despite the high prevalence of substance use, abstinence is a requirement for most social housing across Canada. As such, establishing an evidence-based national social housing policy is critical. To this end, implementing a housing-first approach is a recovery-oriented approach that will help increase accessibility by providing housing without it being conditional on any lifestyle, behavioral, or treatment expectations. Another gap in our health systems is the absence of an interdisciplinary homeless health curriculum. Caring for the homeless is complex, and our current education system lacks curriculum to enforce interdisciplinary homeless health curriculum. We need to teach all fields of young professionals about case management and culturally appropriate care to be able to offer optimized, individualized, and comprehensive care. To summarize, the novelty of these proposals are that they integrate a rights-based approach to addressing the homeless crisis by 1, increasing access to supportive housing through implementing the Housing First policy, and 2, training generations of healthcare professionals through education reform. I'm always eager to collaborate with anyone interested in homeless health, and I would like to express gratitude to everyone attending for coming to an area where we can work towards a more equitable and accessible society for everyone. Congratulations, Alex, and thank you.
Thank you, Eugenia. If you would like to more information about the youth policy proposals, please do check out the CSPC 2022 Awards webpage, which has the top-ranked proposals from this year's competition. Nous sommes très impressionnés par les idées proposées par Alex et à tous les jeunes dans l'auditoire ce soir. Nous vous encourageons de considérer votre contribution au concours l'année prochaine.
So the CSPC Trailblazer Awards recognize individuals who have demonstrated novelty, creativity, and impact through leadership, vision, courage, and commitment to the overall advancement of the science and innovation policy ecosystem.
The CSPC Trailblazer Award recognizes individuals who have demonstrated novelty, creativity, and impact through leadership, vision, courage, and commitment to the overall advancement of science and innovation policy ecosystem.
Joignez-vous à nous pour passer en revue nos précédents lauréats des prix du pionnier.
Thank you. Merci. C'est avec grande humilité que j'accepte cette reconnaissance. À la fois un honneur et un privilège pour moi d'être reconnu par la communauté des politiques scientifiques canadiennes.
I remain convinced that advancement in science and policy innovation are cornerstone to closing the health equity gap along racial lines.
Merci beaucoup. C'est un grand honneur pour moi d'être reconnu ainsi par le CSPC, une association canadienne incontournable.
To present these awards, we wish to invite Dr. Martine Lagacé from the University of Ottawa and member of the Trailblazer Awards Selection Committee to announce the awards. Professeur Lagacé est titulaire d'un doctorat et d'un baccalauréat en psychologie, baccalauréat en communication ainsi qu'un certificat de premier cycle en gérontologie. Elle est actuellement professeure adjointe au département de communication et vice-rectrice associée promotion et développement de la recherche à l'Université d'Ottawa.
Alors, bonsoir à vous tous. Je tenterai d'être brève. Je sais qu'on est peut-être un petit peu fatigué à cette heure de la soirée. Je vais d'abord commencer en disant que je suis extrêmement heureuse et honorée d'être ici ce soir avec vous, de célébrer le travail des lauréats qui recevront donc ces 3 prix ce soir. Je voudrais aussi souligner combien nous sommes fiers à l'Université d'Ottawa de faire équipe depuis déjà plusieurs années avec la conférence sur les politiques scientifiques canadiennes. Je pense que c'est un lieu qui démontre combien, quand les chercheurs font équipe avec les décideurs, on s'oriente vers de meilleures sociétés et nous sommes tous gagnants et gagnantes. Alors, c'est un plaisir renouvelé que de travailler avec Merdad et toute son équipe depuis plusieurs années. I was indeed a member of the Trailblazer Selection Committee and was assisted in this effort by the following members of the committee. Rima Al-Awar, Head Therapeutic Innovation and Drug Discovery of the Institute for Cancer Research, Steve DeRoy, Founding Director and Co-Owner of the Firelight Group, Kevin Fitzgibbon, former Executive Director of Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada, Peter Phillips, Distinguished Professor, University of Saskatchewan, Nadine Spencer, CEO of Brand EQ Group, Nipun Vats, Assistant Deputy Minister, Science and Research at Innovation Science and Economic Development Canada. Nous avons reçu d'excellentes soumissions cette année et les décisions ont été difficiles parce que les candidatures étaient toutes excellentes. So in the following minutes, I'll be presenting 3 Trailblazer Awards. The first is for Innovation Policy. The second is Science for Policy. And the third is Policy for Science. The Innovation Policy Award recognizes an individual who has distinguished themselves for putting the outputs of research, knowledge, or technology into use for broad socio-economic benefits while improving productivity and competitiveness and driving economic growth and job creation. This year, the committee selected Dr. Alicia Main, Associate Vice President Dr. Main is Associate Vice President, Knowledge Mobilization and Innovation at Simon Fraser University for her work on the I-21 program, which was tailor-made to mobilize university research, teach science and technology commercialization, and develop an entrepreneurial mindset in graduate scientists and engineering. Félicitations, Dr. Main.
Thank you very much. You know, they say it takes a village, and I'd say it takes a science innovation ecosystem. So thank you for being here. Thank you to Merdad for all that you have done, swimming upstream for so many years, being passionate about this cause, and to all the volunteers that are here tonight, helping us celebrate science and help to make science make greater impact through innovation policy. Some of you were here for the panel this morning where I spoke about some of my belief in the early stage interventions we can make, both nationally and internationally, by investing in people, by helping look at the incentives from our HQP, our graduate researchers, our postdocs, our PIs, and thinking about how, if we were in their shoes, we would try to make it easier to make impact from their research. And I think there's some easy innovation policy pieces that we could create if we had the will to do it. The courage to do it, which is what this award is about. Some of that is training and taking advantage of the underutilized resource we have and the unique conditions that we have in Canada. Some of that is realizing that a one-size-fits-all solution won't work for breakthrough research, and having the courage to maybe have strategic buckets and think a little bit differently about breakthrough science innovation. We heard from Nippon Vats this morning about how we punch above our weight in that area. Let's think about how to extrapolate that impact. And, you know, the remarks that you made earlier, Greg, about I'm from your era, very close in age and in the type of values that were instilled with me early. And innovation policy comes honestly to me around the kitchen table. My father was in the government of Pierre Elliott Trudeau. He was an MP. He was Parliamentary Secretary for Science. He was on the Science Innovation Council of Canada for about 10 years, and he was a scientist entrepreneur. So it's no doubt that, that those lessons and those examples came to me early. And I'm very proud tonight to be here amongst this community of people trying to strengthen our science innovation ecosystem. And I'm very proud to be continuing my father's legacy. Thank you.
Félicitations, Dr. May. The second award, the Science for Policy Award, recognizes an individual who has distinguished themselves via the application and use of scientific research and knowledge to inform evidence-based decisions for public policy and regulations. The committee selected Dr. Gregory Smallwood, Principal Research Officer at the National Research Council of Canada, for his work on international climate change-related policy, which comes at a critical time in efforts to achieve global policy agreements to reduce overall greenhouse gas emissions. His science to policy advocacy has had a dramatically positive impact on reducing global transportation-related black carbon and other practical matters that are key drivers of climate change and adverse health effects. In particular, his sustained and creative policy advocacy has resulted in one of the most significant changes to global aircraft engine emission standards since the 1980s. Congratulations to Dr. Smallwood. He cannot be here with us tonight, but we have a recording where he will be accepting his award.
Good evening, distinguished audience, in particular members of the Canadian Science Policy Centre. I am deeply honoured and humbled to have been selected as the first recipient of the CSPC Trailblazer Award in Science Policy in the new Science for Policy category. The CSPC represents the pinnacle of science and innovation policy in Canada and is recognised globally. This important award is the highest distinction I have earned in a long and productive career. There are many people working on science for policy who should be recognized, and I am hopeful the light will shine on them in future years. I thank the CSPC for considering my work worthy of this award. I've been fortunate to be able to take a holistic approach to my research, taking it from lab bench innovation to international regulation. The principal success was in the development of a technique to measure black carbon, a nanoparticle aerosol emitted by hydrocarbon combustion. It is a strong agent for climate change, affects local air quality, and is implicated in adverse health effects. Actions to reduce black carbon have synergistic benefits in all three areas: climate, environment, and human health. In the Metrology Research Center, I learned the characteristics of the complete metrologist, which means going beyond thinking as a scientific expert to having a client focus, being a diplomat with international awareness, being professional, and most of all, being helpful to ensure that we explain our work so that those around us understand it. These are also essential tenets for bridging the science policy interface. In order to take this laboratory innovation forward all the way to regulation, I was fortunate to be surrounded by a strong team at the National Research Council and to be supported by so many external collaborators, scientists, engineers, policymakers, regulators, from academia, industry, and government. There are far too many to name, but there are some specific people that I must mention who shared the path with me throughout the years. First and foremost are my wife and family, who never once complained about the lengthy days in the lab, endless travel to field measurement campaigns, and to meetings to persuade the international community to complete this aircraft emissions certification requirement, the first new one in over 4 decades. For their unwavering support to research excellence, I am so appreciative of the leadership at the NRC, which has continued to invest in its scientists and create the greatest opportunity possible for researchers to succeed, not only in terms of technical development, but also in innovation for the public good. It is in this latter space that science for policy can thrive. I was fortunate to have had 2 early career mentors at the National Research Council whose guidance in those formative years was essential, Dr. Dave Snelling and Dr. Omer Goulder. I cannot express how much having their input meant to me. While I've had many external collaborators and supporters, I must mention Wendy Bailey at Transport Canada. She was the one who connected my scientific research to the regulatory community, opening the door for me as a technical delegate to the International Civil Aviation Organization, a United Nations specialized agency where emissions certification requirements for aircraft are produced. All through this adventure, I was able to engage with Canadian and international policymakers who taught me so much about the considerations that go into drafting effective and accepted policy. It is not enough to have a technically sufficient or even superior approach. There are so many other factors that must be considered. The regulatory requirement must be written with precision yet be concise and understandable. Translating scientific jargon to understandable policy requires cooperation and effective communication from both sides. This is a lesson I have learned and carry with me every day. I have one message for my scientific colleagues. In order for your research to have impact, you must make all the effort you can to reach beyond your everyday science community to communicate it to the broader communities, including policy, in terms that all can understand. Once again, thank you for recognizing my contributions to a broad international effort and for bestowing the Trailblazer Award in Science Policy, Science for Policy, on me.
So our final Trailblazer Award is the Policy for Science Award. Ce que je vous disais, c'est que c'est un nouveau prix cette année qui est remis. Ce prix politique pour la science récompense le travail d'une personne dont le travail, justement, est pionnier en termes de politique et de pratiques qui contribuent au développement de nouvelles technologies, au renforcement des capacités et aussi aux infrastructures de recherche. This year, the committee selected Dr. Imogen Ko, professor, Toronto Metropolitan University, I'm going to finish reading because it's important that we all understand why you were chosen. Professor Imogen Ko, she's, as I mentioned, professor at the Metropolitan University for her work on integrating the principles of equity, diversity, and inclusion into the research ecosystem of STEM, including into the policies and practices of funding agencies and government, and into the workplaces of commerce and industry, where scientific knowledge may be generated or applied. Long before EDI became street talk within government and academia, she recognized a problem endemic to science. She has had significant influence on where, when, and how EDI has been and is being integrated into policy developed by government, funding agencies, scholarly societies, post-secondary education, healthcare entities, and commercial and non-for-profit enterprises. Imogen Co has inspired a generation with her championship work on EDI. Bravo.
Thank you so much. Okay, you said 15 minutes, right, Medad? It's very dangerous to give me a podium and a microphone. I want to thank CSPC so much for this award. I have a very conflicted relationship with awards because we know they're one of the skewed metrics that we use to evaluate merit. And if you don't know about the Matthew effect, please go look it up. I can't avoid a teachable moment as a professor. So go look up the Matthew effect. We give awards to people who get awards. But this award is very meaningful to me because it really recognizes the invisible and usually uncredited work that I and others have done in parallel with having a career as an academic research scientist. So there are a number of us who have done that, the conventional things that you're supposed to do, get grants, mentor graduate students, publish papers. But at the same time, I've had parallel careers of activism and advocacy and engagement with various bodies to help develop and shift policy because we recognized that this was a really important contribution to the community. There never used to be a space for that kind of section to tell what you had been doing on an NSERC Discovery Grant application or some other application, but there is now because it's an important contribution and it's a highly impactful activity that scientists can engage with. And I've had the privilege, I've had the privilege to, and continue to very much enjoy working with various sectors on embedding EDI principles into research processes. I want to acknowledge that this work builds on the creative work of scholars that have been here for millennia, and that we must engage and embrace those learnings, and I commit to continued learning in my own journey as a scholar. After hearing about this award, I went back through old emails, Medad, because we've known each other quite a long time, and I wanted to find my first sort of recollections of CSPC, and I think it was about 2015, and there was a meeting in Toronto, and I was on a panel, I led a panel, and there was some discussion from some young people about frustrations with the conference, and I looked around, and I have to say the makeup of that conference was, shall we say, flawed. So I came and talked to you about the demographics, and you did what I can only describe as the exact kind of behavior that I would so love to see in leaders everywhere. You did not become defensive. We engaged in a dialogue. We talked about how to improve and how to increase the diversity of the conference over the years, and we did it. We had the first EDI panel in 2016. It was very nerve-wracking. I think I'm the first person to say EDI at a CSPC event. It was outside the regular scheduling of the conference, and we didn't know if anybody was going to show up, but the room was full. People wanted to learn more, and we've had panels since then, and they've always been full. And now I listen to people at these events. I listen to the presidents of the funding councils. I listen to leaders, and it's almost as if EDI has always been here, and we're all talking about it so comfortably. We have work to do. I want to thank the participants of those early panels for putting their trust in me. Some of them are here. Dr. Shahini Ghosh, you were one of my first. Yeah. Thank you for trusting me. Indigenous scholars, Malene Goodchild and Deanna Burgett. I've learned so much. Dr. Mahadeo Sukai taught me everything about creating cultures of accessibility for people with disabilities. By the way, closed captioning, ramps, and ASL. So we've got some work to do, okay? I was very worried about Kirsty Duncan climbing up those steps this morning. I also want to thank Anna Sophia Barrows, my partner in crime, who couldn't be here, but without whom none of those panels would ever have happened. I want to thank Toronto Metropolitan University and Stephen, you and your team, for putting this nomination together. This is an institution that changed its name. Remember that universities are medieval, Eurocentric constructs, colonial constructs. They were built by old rich white men for young rich white men. They are designed on exclusionary principles. Exclusion is a feature, not a bug. And yet we have modeled our institutions on this very medieval Eurocentric structure. And we're continually trying to retrofit them. If I had my way, I would burn them down and we'd start again. I have a ton of privilege, I have tenure, I can say these things. We hold these institutions up as if they're the best that we can do, but they're not. We can do better. We really can do better, and we must do better. If you're going to push the agenda on social justice as an academic scientist, you have to have courage, and some of my colleagues have talked about courage. You also have to have humility. And certainly I have privilege, which means I also have responsibility. We have to understand as scientists what it means to be complicit in systems of oppression. And being silent means being complicit. We cannot be silent. If you claim to support individually or institutionally, as I've heard frequently, you can claim to be in support, for instance, for gender equity or work-life balance, and you want to remove barriers to access for historically excluded groups, then you must challenge and dismantle systems of oppression that seek to control reproductive rights. You may not have heard of an academic scientist say this in a public setting, but I'm going to say it now. Abortion is healthcare, and we need to protect the rights of people to define their own reproductive destinies. If you want full engagement of all the talent, you need to be sure that all the talent can be fully engaged on their own terms. We must pay attention, much closer attention to the concerns, fears, but also the incredible contributions of queer and trans scientists, of disabled scientists. I want to remind you that tomorrow is LGBTQ2S+ in STEM Day. Again, all of those organizations and individuals who said they were committed to EDI, I want to know what you're doing to celebrate that day, make members of that community in your organizations feel welcomed, included, and valued. Data and evidence, the science, the research science, and a shout out to our social science colleagues who do much of this work. Data and evidence say that those people still feel discriminated against, harassed, unsafe. Diverse representation is not synonymous with EDI expertise. So don't expect those from historically excluded demographics to carry the workload for EDI initiatives. And let's push the conversation. We need to talk about toxic masculinity in the tech sector. If we're going to promote AI and machine learning, let's talk about the culture. We need to talk about white fragility in academia and use these words. We need to talk about racism and sexual harassment in the sciences, whether they be field sciences or laboratory sciences. These are the kinds of things that I hear a lot from trainees, particularly across the country. We can do better. We can have these difficult conversations. We really can. We've come so far. But I really want to push us into these more challenging conversations using this language, and so that we can build better, richer, more creative science cultures. A senior male professor once commented how I was always banging on about women in science. And he also told a colleague of mine to get off her soapbox, her metaphorical soapbox. And it was really annoying, but you know, the best revenge is living well, or certainly living loud. And so I launched the program Soapbox Science in Canada, and we build real three-dimensional soapboxes. It's rolled out across Canada now. It's one of my most, I feel wonderful about this particular program. But we have real soapboxes, and we put gender diverse people, scientists, on those soapboxes, and they talk to the public. They talk about their science. They tell people about their passions for their science. And we bring science to the public. They share the science, and I'm not getting off my soapbox. Sorry. So finally, just to the young people in the room, in the audience, you have a champion in me. I will sponsor you. I will maybe mentor you. I'm not a great mentor, but I'll certainly champion you. And my DMs are always open as long as Elon, you have a voice. You have, and you deserve to use that voice. And you have a reasonable expectation. It is reasonable to expect that other people will shut up and listen to you, that other people will make space for you. So be bold, use your voice, and with one more very deep gratitude and thanks, I will now shut up.
I think you're convinced that the selection committee did a very good job this year. Yes. Congratulations to all the award winners. Merci et bravo à tous les lauréats. C'est ici que se termine la cérémonie pour les Trailblazer Awards. Longue vie à CSPC. Bravo pour tout le travail accompli. Bonne soirée, mesdames, messieurs.
Congratulations to all of the Trailblazers. And thank you, Professor Lagacé, for presenting these awards. We will now proceed to the final segment of the evening. The Lifetime Achievement Award recognizes an individual who has made significant contributions to science and innovation policy, and who throughout their career has championed and inspired the science and innovation policy community in Canada.
The CSPC Science Policy Lifetime Achievement Award recognizes outstanding individuals who have made significant contributions to science and innovation policy throughout their career, and have championed and inspired the science and innovation policy community in Canada.
I'm gobsmacked. Ou en français, on dit je suis gobsmacked.
I am honored that the CSPC has selected me to receive this magnificent award.
And talk about a bolt out of the blue. What a surprise. And my only regret is that it's hard to do justice to this humbling occasion while staring into a laptop monitor rather than being among you in the flesh and blood, as it were.
J'invite maintenant le président directeur général du CPSC, Mehrdad Hariri, à annoncer la lauréate.
So another exciting moment of the night. I must say on behalf of the board of directors that the selection process was not easy. There were a lot of excellent candidates. But I want to ask the AV, please do not show any slides. Let's keep the excitement going. It is my absolute pleasure and distinct honor to announce the recipient of this year's award. She has been selected as a result of so many years of exceptional contribution and leadership over the course of her career in bringing Indigenous perspectives and knowledge to national and international policymaking, in particular on environmental health, sustainability, and preservation. She has raised awareness of the threat of climate change in the Arctic and its relationship to human rights and Indigenous rights in Canada and globally. She has been very clearly articulating the interconnectedness of Inuit culture, the environment, the economy, foreign policy, global health, and sustainability. Her work with the Arctic Climate Impact Assessment integrated traditional and Western knowledge and evidence, bringing a human face to climate change in the Arctic. She has inspired the science policy community across Canada with her insights, courage, and voice. Ladies and gentlemen, the recipient of the 2022 Science Policy Lifetime Achievement Award is Ms. Shilawat Cloutier.
Nakormik ilunasi. Ildarayaular migamana korsapunga ilunasinyut. Thank you so much. And I think my nephew, Robert Watt, who is here, who's also an important player in Ottawa as a director of at the Canada Language Commission, after hearing all of this incredible scientific world tonight, is thinking, how is my auntie fitting into all of this? But indeed, I am very honored. And when I received the information or the letter from Mary Dad back in August, I believe, I was rather surprised and wondered, okay, the Science Policy Center, okay, that's, and then he told me a little bit more. And of course, it was Denise Amiot, I don't know if she's here, who first connected. Are you here? And wonderful. And that was through LinkedIn, she found me, and that was the start of all of that. So thank you very kindly to the Science Policy Center and to Mariad, who has been contacting me since. So, and it's been wonderful to get to know, and I've heard of Greg Fergus, of course, and nice to meet you in person. And I don't know if Stephanie Meakin made it here tonight. I don't know if she's here. She was one of my advisors when we were working so closely together on the international stage, and particularly with the work of the POPs Treaty, the persistent organic pollutants that were poisoning our country food and the nursing milk of our Inuit women of the Arctic with these persistent organic pollutants. And I just wanted to acknowledge, if she is here, I don't know, because her father was not well tonight and she wasn't sure whether she would make it. And I also want to just mention Terry Fenge, the late Terry Fenge, who was my strategic counsel throughout my international elected work that I was doing. And he would be so proud, and he would be very honored that I would be here. So I have 20 minutes, and I usually take about 45 minutes, so I'm going to try my very best. I won't keep you 40 minutes, okay? But I want to start just by a quote that that has really stood by me for many, many years now as a woman doing this work on the international stage. And it's by Louise Bogan, who was an author, and she, of course, since passed away. But this happens to be the epigraph of my book, The Right to Be Cold. A little plug for my book for those who haven't read it. And where it really spoke to me, and this stood beside me on a paper in front of me for many years. And she said, in a time lacking in truth and certainty and filled with anguish and despair, no woman should be shamefaced in attempting to give back to the world through her work a portion of its lost heart. And so that has stayed with me throughout all of the work that I have done. And what I like to do very briefly, I usually do it in great detail, is speak to you about the actual systems and history that has really created the health and social problems that we face and challenges that we face in the Arctic, because very few people know that context. But I won't go into them in detail because I will expect you to read it in my book, which is very much in detail. But you know, we've come from this really remarkable traditional way of life where my family traveled only by dog team the first 10 years of my life. And I didn't know any English until I started school at the age of 6. And then I was sent away at the age of 10 for school. 3 years in Nova Scotia, 3 years at residential school, and 3 years in Ottawa right here. And so things have changed very quickly for us in one lifetime. And in my mother and grandmother's lifetime, certainly. But through that whole process, you know, we have maintained a way of life that we feel so strongly and love and want to keep protecting, because it's a powerful culture. We don't want to just be victims of globalization and commercialization and colonization. We want to become the teachers that will guide and help us. And thank you, I forgot to mention, the wonderful elder who made even me stand up and sing tonight. So thank you for that. That was wonderful. But we went through many, many changes from the 1920s, the 1940s, the changes that were made in our lifetime almost overnight as we became fur trappers to meet the global fur market. And then when that collapsed, we went into starvation. And we were guided and helped, in fact, by the American military who arrived during the Second World War to build the airstrips in my region and up in Iqaluit as well. And that saved the day for us. But things happened overnight. Our spiritual practices were taken away. Our diet changed. And on all of those things that were happening were almost overnight. And schools were being built, and we were coerced into communities. And then, of course, the residential schools that were built. For us, we went to Churchill, Manitoba, where it was federally run, not mission run. And then, of course, the forced relocations into the high Arctic in the name of sovereignty, the dog slaughters that happened that very few people know about, the 20,000 dogs that were killed off in the name of health, the seal bans by the misguided emotional stances of animal rights movements, the sexual and physical and emotional abuses that started to happen, leading to the addictions that we see today and the high suicide rates. And so, of course, that was a breakdown of Inuit society. But I remember in my living memory before all of that really started to happen. The first suicide in my community happened when I was 18 years old. And so things have happened almost overnight for us. In the 1970s, we started to negotiate our land claims. And of course, we've built some of our own institutions, but certainly there was still loss of land through that process and the relinquishment of some of our own rights. In the 1980s, when we realized we were being poisoned from afar with these persistent organic pollutants and trying to make this an issue of health rather than it just being a chemical story or an environmental problem, we worked with the world at the global level, at the UN level, to negotiate this treaty leading to the successful Stockholm Convention, because we were able to work in partnership with the scientific community that had built the data, and with Health Canada and with our communities. And we were able to influence the world by engaging in the politics of influence rather than the politics of protest, and really make an impact on making our country food safer today. And so that's where Stephanie and Terry were very involved in that work as my advisors throughout that process as we helped to negotiate that convention. And of course, now climate change. You know, it's adding to the already very stressed and vulnerable situation that we live in our communities. The poverty, the poor health, the food insecurities, the housing, and the addictions and the suicides. And so this is yet another assault and another wave of tumultuous change that is happening in our world. And it's very ironic because we're finding that the solutions to the problems that we face, many of them, are the answers lie right at home. The answers lie in our culture. So we're finding our culture is the medicine that we seek. And we're trying to teach the world that I think Indigenous wisdom and knowledge and Inuit wisdom and knowledge is the medicine the world seeks in better understanding ourselves and understanding sustainability. And that's why I fought so hard and pioneered that work and connection with climate change and human rights, because our ability to be Inuit as we know it, was being so minimized and destroyed. And having seen the first wave and the kind of impacts it's had on my world, was a no-brainer for me to say, yes, it is a human right violation for countries, big countries. At the time we were targeting the United States, and the challenges that we had during that period of time. But again, I think even with the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights didn't move forward with our petition, our human rights petition, Inuit petition, I think we helped to change the discourse on the language of climate change and really humanized it, where we brought it out of just the realm of politics and economics. And we were able to really bring that. But you know, what we had in our arms as well, in our hands, was that remarkable work that we did together with the Arctic Climate Impact Assessment way back when Bob Carell was the chair. And we used to call it the Bob and Sheila Roadshow after that came out, because he would speak the science, and he was a great scientific storyteller, and he was really good at being able to explain all the science while I talked about the human aspect of climate change in our world, because the ice is our life force in the Arctic. And it is about mobility and transportation. And when that starts to go, it becomes an issue of safety and security. And of course, our culture is so holistic in the way in which we prepare our children for the challenges and the opportunities of life. And even more so now, it is even more important for the youth who, in our world, that is so vulnerable because of the legacy of colonization, the legacy of these historical traumas that happened to us so very quickly and almost overnight, where we're reeling from that. And so, because Inuit culture is very holistic in its approach to preparing our children for life issues. And it's not just the technical skills of learning how to be a proficient provider and a natural conservationist, but it's also about the patience and the endurance and the courage and the boldness and the persistence and the determination and the resiliency building, the coping skills that are built, and the sound judgment and wisdom. We call that silatunuk in our language, in the way in which we teach our children that. So it's really, and those are key. So it's really not just about the ice and polar bears. The world has come to know our world, or our wildlife, better than its people, and to try to humanize these issues over the years. 27 years I've been at this. Right from the time that I was elected with ICC Canada, and then later became the chair of ICC, trying to humanize these issues so that we could bring that down to the communities who are really needing to be understood for that history, and for our aspirations for our children, who are taking their lives in numbers, in bigger numbers, in the biggest in North America. And the importance of country food. You know, people say, well, why is that so important to you? Because it isn't just the nutritional value of our food. There's also the cultural value, the educational value, the emotional value, the spiritual value, the communal value, and of course, the medicinal value. I usually go into great detail in each of these values, but I don't have that time tonight. So here we are humanizing, trying to humanize these issues of the toxins and climate change, because again, the world doesn't know that context of why we struggle so much. And often people think, is it their inability to adapt to the modern world? No, not at all. In fact, we're probably one of the most adaptable people, because we live in that kind of environment that requires us to be extremely focused and adaptable to many situations. So here we are, finding that there has been a lot of disconnect in the urban setting because oftentimes people are very busy in the urban setting and not able to connect to each other, or to their environment, or to their food source. I'm not trying to generalize here completely, but certainly that's the challenge that we've been having for a long time. But we're now in a place, I think, to really, a great opportunity to reconnect to what really matters. And if you haven't had a chance, there's another plug for my TED Talk that I gave in 2016 on human trauma and his planet trauma as one. And again, I go into detail on that, but I won't now. If you can take a look at that, that's out there on YouTube. Things will happen slowly because it's taken a long time for us to be where we are today, where we've had those disconnects all over the map on so many issues. And if we could just bring together more of the energies and focus together, then I think it's going to be helpful. But it will happen at the speed of empathy, and it will happen at the speed of trust. The more people that understand from a place of deep understanding and empathy, then it will speed up that process of the trusting relationships that we all now need to make. And the pandemic I think the pandemic, as well as the recovery of the children at the residential schools, have softened and opened up the hearts and minds of more Canadians than ever before. And I think these are the moments that we now have to really just embrace and figure out, how do we reconnect back to what really matters to each and every one of us, whether you're Indigenous or non-Indigenous, because this is about all of us. This is about our common humanity. And so it's a grim reminder, though, of how interconnected we all are with the pandemic that has hit us so hard wherever we are. And it has broken open even more widely the unresolved issues of racism and social injustices, not just in the Indigenous world, but also in the Black communities. And so we can't be blaming just one country or one species for this virus, but what we have been doing to one another and to the habitat of all wildlife for so many years. And many countries are now being fully exposed as a result of this pandemic for their outdated policies and approaches, which are putting even more at risk those who are already existing in poor health conditions and poor health systems. And we certainly know that in the Arctic. And it has given us that time. I never thought in my wildest dreams in the 27 years I've been working on these issues that a virus would bring all of these unsustainable activities to a halt. But it did, and we saw how the air cleared in many of the cities around the world almost overnight, and the animals that surfaced where they had not been before. I'm not suggesting the CO2s went down, because that's going to take a lot longer because we've got to be addressing these issues, and we're not there yet. And you know, we've got some disappointing news very recently about Canada's ranking, about how we're not doing enough yet to address these issues of our emissions here, and we need to do that. I'm not trying to shame people into doing this, but it's serious stuff that we're talking about now in terms of our children and our grandchildren, and the rhetoric has been there, but the action has not been enough. And we've got to do a lot more here in our country. And a lot of these new viruses, of course, as we know, are driven by climate change and the warming. But I was in New Zealand and Australia after my book came out, and I was on a panel with Tim Flannery. I'm sure many of you know this great scientist from Australia. But we were in New Zealand together. And at the end of the panel discussion I was on with Tim, he was asked the question, what is lacking in us that is not allowing us to take urgent action to address climate change when we know the science is strong and correct? And I would add, corroborated by Indigenous wisdom, who are the ground truthers on the ground on what is really happening in terms of the changes. So when he was asked, what is lacking in us? His answer, imagination. Imagine we can do things differently. Imagine we can innovate differently. Imagine we can treat these issues differently and create and innovate sustainable businesses differently. And I would say, imagine we can tap into the wisdom and ingenuity of Indigenous wisdom and add that to the mix there. We'd be going on somewhere that would make a real difference, I think. And so I think we have to reimagine that new way forward with a conscious intention to really make a difference in what we're doing together and not just readapt what has not been working for any of us. Values that are based on fairness, on respect for the land, for the environment, for our planet, for each other, and not to waste so much, and perhaps even go back to more basics. So from a human community perspective, the human side of climate change humanizes the issue. And so what does that mean for all of us? It's not, I know science is really strong. I've worked with many scientists. In fact, I remember the days of the Arctic Climate Impact Assessment, racing to Iceland during those kinds of work that we were doing under the Arctic Council and having that challenge of the Bush administration at that time. And we thought that was a challenge in those days with American politics, but anyway, I won't get into that. And so we stood by. I even had to fly there on a very unexpected trip and stood by the scientists and stood by the science and said, this is really happening on the ground. And yes, it's true what is happening there. And so all of that work that we did with scientists was to also incorporate Indigenous knowledge into every chapter of that assessment. And that assessment was even long before, the IPCC reports were coming out. And it happened to be on the circumpolar world. So I think we also, and I won't get into this now because I don't have much time, we have to be thinking about the Arctic not just in terms of digging up more of the land up there because of the accessibility of all, what's the resources underneath that melting ice, but to start to think about how do we conserve it? How do we protect it instead? And perhaps even think about and imagine, as Tim would say, use your imagination and ideas for conservation economies that could work really well. And it would be a culture match in the Arctic for our hunters who are so undervalued, but yet they are natural conservationists already, that they would be being paid to protect and to conserve and the areas of the waters and all of that up there. It would be so affirming, I think, for our people who are so undervalued. And what a better way to reclaim what they lost that was taken from us, our pride, our dignity, our resourcefulness, and our wisdom. Because we are, after all, and I say this all the time, the inventors of the kayak, the boat that is replicated worldwide, but we don't have much recognition for that invention. And we can build a home of snow, engineer it perfectly. And this is architecture and engineering at its very best. And so we don't want to just be victims. We have much to offer. Briefly, about over a year ago during COVID, I was still up north. I've had to move to Montreal, by the way, because when COVID hit, I was one of those independents that was hit really hard. And for a year and a half, I had no work. I couldn't travel. We were locked down in the Arctic. And then when virtual events started to happen, the internet is so bad up north. I've had to since move to Montreal, but it's not a huge loss. I have 2 children, 2 grandchildren there, so I'm okay. But I was asked to give a keynote, a virtual keynote to 12, maybe some of you were involved, I don't know, 1,200 scientists from 37 countries. It was the Arctic Science Summit hosted by Portugal. Were any of you there on that virtual event? Yes? Good. So you would recall this quote that I used because I said, okay, I've worked with scientists before, but now it's even more so. We have to seize that moment with scientists as well, where things have to shift. Many scientists in the history of the Arctic have come up in the spring and leave in the fall, like our geese. And sometimes we didn't know what they were studying, and we didn't know how we would benefit The guidelines are much better. Scientists are much more open to working directly on the ground with many of our people with a great deal of respect today. But again, we can do better, as the last speaker was saying. We can do better no matter what at every level, in every situation, in terms of that kind of respect. But I had come across this incredible quote from Gus Speth. You people, I'm sure you've all heard of Gus, the scientist from the USA. And I wondered how these scientists were going to take it, and I used it in my speech because I wanted to kind of create this opening now, which I try to do in all of the talks that I give about it starts with us. It's all about inside of us, not our roles, not our titles, not our jobs, but us as as human beings who need to go deeper and go from the head to the heart. I know it's hard for scientists to think that way, but many are starting to think that way, to humanize these issues from that perspective. I think it's really important. And this is what Gus said, and I quote him. He said, I used to think that top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, environmental collapse, and climate change. I thought that, this is interfering here, I thought that with 30 years of good science, we could address these problems, but I was wrong, he said. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with these, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation. And we scientists don't know how to do that. And so I wondered, how are they going to take this? And they lapped it up because these are this was during the pandemic, smack in the middle of it. And all of us were, no matter who you were, was starting to deeply think more about what am I doing in my life? What are we doing? What do we need to do to change our perspectives? What do we need to do to reconnect with what really matters? And that means connect to one another. And so they lapped it up and they appreciated it. And I quote someone else who has really guided me in my own spiritual journey as well, where she says, personal transformation can and does have global effects. As we go, so goes the world, for the world is us. And the revolution that will save the world is ultimately a personal one. And so it really does come back down to us, because I think without that deep understanding, as I said, speed of empathy and speed of trust that has to be built between so many levels of people and human beings around this world, then here in Canada, truth and reconciliation just won't happen if we don't go into those spaces of the heart. And so we've got to lead with life-centered science, life-centered ways in which we can reconnect to what really matters. And I want to end now very briefly on leadership. And I don't mean political leadership. I mean, we are all leaders in our own right. And we can offer leadership in whatever role we play in this world today. And I was asked by Inuit women who were holding a summit in Iqaluit many years ago when I was teaching at Bowdoin College in Maine, the human dimension to climate change down there. And they said, we know you're away this year, but we really want to hear from you. And if you could have yourself videotaped with this question we're going to ask you, please answer it, and then we'll show it in our summit for Inuit women who were prioritizing, because after all, you know, the women, we carry a lot. We're mothers, you know, of children, and our children are so much at risk in the Arctic because of all of these issues. And this really is about our children. Climate change is not just about the ice or polar bears, even though those are all really interconnected. But it really is about our children and making sure that they're equipped, because those who have had those kinds of traditional upbringing and have learned how not to be impulsive, oftentimes can have that integrated much better in the modern stressors of the day, because those skills taught traditionally are very transferable to the modern world. And so I was asked, what does leadership mean to you? And this is how I've responded. Leadership to me means never to lose sight of the fact that the issues at hand are so much bigger than oneself. And leadership is about working from a principled and ethical place within oneself, and it is to model authentically, genuinely for others, a sense of calm, a sense of clarity, and a sense of focus. And leadership is to always, always check inwards to ensure one is leading from a position of strength, not fear or victimhood, so one does not project one's own limitations onto those you're modeling possibilities for. And so thank you for this opportunity, and thank you so much for thinking of me, to the committee and to others who have thought of me for this remarkable and very appreciative award that you've given me. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sheila Watt-Cloutier, for your inspiring words. Thank you for your testimony, very moving testimony about your work on climate change and about the medicine and wisdom of Inuit culture. We've now arrived at the conclusion of our evening together. Je souhaiterais féliciter tous nos lauréats et lauréates. Merci à Merdad, Greg Fergus, aux bénévoles et aux employés du CPSC et à Kelly Ligris de Kell Consulting pour son organisation du gala ce soir.
Thank you to all of our honored guests and speakers, our tireless volunteers, CSPC staff, and each and every one of you for making this a really special night of celebration. We look forward to seeing you all tomorrow at the 7:45 breakfast session, okay, for a conversation with the new advisory panel on the Federal Research Support System. Christina, it has been a pleasure to MC this gala with you.
Thank you, Eugenia. Le plaisir est partagé. Poursuivons notre soirée à la réception post-gala qui se tiendra à l'étage du dessous. We hope you'll join us for the post-gala reception on the first floor, but I see Merdad came up the stairs, and so he may have a few final words. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Christina. There is one last thank you, which apparently they forgot. I think it was a wonderful ceremony, but because of the two fabulous MCs. So let's put our hands together for Christina and Eugenia.